Interesting about that is there's economic instruction in that speech,
Right.
okay, which I think a lot of people slept on because King was just beginning to evolve in terms of understanding economics, particularly when he went and criticized U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War because he felt those resources were being taken away from the war on poverty here in America.
Right.
Okay. And that's when he became persona non grata, even in his inner circle.
I would dare say that he became persona non grata before, because even though he came from a church, the church really wasn't rocking with him or the civil rights activities in general. In
Right.
general, right now you hear a lot of people, pass on the mythology that the civil rights movement started in the black church. Nah, it started with some pastors. Yeah, possibly, primarily,
Yeah.
but the churches in general, particularly our churches, were like, nah, y'all doing too much.
Yeah. I think the biggest criticism was how the youth were being used in those demonstrations. They're saying, well, you're putting our youth at risk. We're always having to use money. In fact, one of King's biggest critics, believe it or not, was A.G. Gaston.
The multimillionaire.
Mm-hmm. Because Gaston comes from that Booker T. Washington school. Even though he bought into the not really the accommodationist part, but the self-reliance part and the economic empowerment part. Okay. And he felt like and I don't know if it was Gaston or someone else. So when the Montgomery bus boycott crippled the Montgomery bus company, I want to say it was Gaston or somebody else who came into King's study and says, now we can take over the bus company. But King wasn't there yet in terms of economic empowerment.
Wow. Yeah, well, I tell you what, Zumbi, man, this is our annual Dr. King. What's good, fam? As real as they come. We have some other family in the room. Halito. What's up, John, son? Halito, brother. Opasa. Okay. All right. In order to dream, one must first be sleep, Passa. Okay. Peace be well. Peace to the family. What's good, fam? Uh-oh. The civil rights movement technically started in 1866. And by the time Malcolm Martin and our parents' them time was like the sixth iteration. Thank you, Todd. All right. And peace and love. Peace and love, Music Land HQ. You know what it's time to do. It's time to get on code. And this one is our annual conversation about the Honorable Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We do this every year because people got it faded. They talk a whole lot of crazy stuff about Dr. King. They've watered down Dr. King, and it's up to us to keep the true revolutionary alive in us. You know what I'm saying? So, as we say, it's time to get on code. Get on code, become the code, teach the code. Our code is empowerment. So, let's get on code. All right. Welcome to Get on Code, the Fly Guy Show, which is a series of melanated conversations focused on empowerment, health, wealth, and knowledge of self.
People think in binary choices because they are conditioned to.
And on the wall was a picture of a wolf and a lion. I think the wolf was the Democratic Party, the lion was the Republicans.
But the drug trade and all these illegal stuff that people do, that's still economics. It's just that they couldn't do it in a traditional system.
We're talking about melanated wealth.
So we can build wealth, but we just, for some reason, don't seem to be able to transfer it.
You had a great experience. Fine. That means nothing.
What were you told as a child about education? You had to be how many times better?
Every impression without an expression becomes depression.
All right. Dr. King's dreams and nightmares. And you know what, Zumbi? I can't. I had to keep it a buck. I had to go hip hop with this, man.
Mm.
Are you familiar with Meek Mill's magnum opus entitled "Dreams and Nightmares"?
No.
All right. Ain't this what y'all been waiting for? Y'all ready? I used to pray for times like this, to rhymes like this. So I had to grind like this, that, to shine like this. We got to grind, y'all. It's grind time, y'all. We got to put in the work, right? In a matter of time, I spent on some locked up. Hey, look, our people were held back. You know, whatever term you want to go with, we dealt with some hesitation, some domination. We dealt with some evil that had, that really locked us up. It was like we were in the back of a paddy wagon. You know, we were kind of locked up. Our wrists were cuffed. But now it's time to marry the game. And what's the game? The game is improvement. What's the game? The game is empowerment. If you want it, you got to see it with a clear-eyed view. And that's what we're doing tonight. We're making sure that you get that fresh water, that clear water. You know what I'm saying? Like the prophet Elijah Muhammad said, that clear water. 'Cause, look, we got a shorty, and they trying to bless you. What's the shorty? Empowerment. That's the shorty. The shorty is empowerment. And so today, we're going to deal with empowerment as it relates to Dr. King. So you weren't familiar with that magnum opus, Dreams and Nightmares?
No, not at all.
That part,
Okay.
yes. It was, it's a banger. It's a banger in the clubs, by the way. A banger in the clubs, by the way. So, in dealing with Dr. King, one of the things that I find interesting is we really water down the brother.
Mm.
We really water Dr. King down. And one of the things that you were just talking about is the truth of the matter that we all kind of grow in empowerment.
Right.
So in the height of the civil rights movement, Dr. King wasn't as focused on empowerment in the beginning as he was towards the end.
Mm.
Is that what I'm getting from you, brother?
Yeah, and this may sound weird to people, but if you look at King's evolution, there's a similar parallel to Malcolm's evolution. And here's what I mean by this. When King was brought into the movement, he was only 26 years old, and he was reluctant to really be in this movement. He was more of a theological, spiritual leader where he was challenging America's moral compass. Now, as he evolved, he began to deal more with how does this thing work? How does this thing work politically? How does this thing work economically? How do things connect with one another? Okay. And I think that's where he became, quote unquote, more of a threat, because he wanted to deal with the nuts and bolts of things and strategize of how to combat that, even though he was still theologically rooted in his leadership. He began to evolve to where he struck a balance between the theology and the everyday practical needs of the people.
Yeah, I truly agree. I mean, he said this country has socialism for the rich, rugged individualism for the poor. So he's like, y'all hypocritical. Our country is hypocritical. So when he started out, like you were saying, he may have been more churchy.
Well, I wouldn't even say churchy. That's why I said he was more of a spiritual. And here's another thing that I think we need to have a reassessment of King about. Okay. How many Christian preachers would have stood with Muhammad Ali and supported him in his opposition to the Vietnam War as a conscientious objector? Okay. how many Christian preachers would have endorsed and nominated a Vietnamese Buddhist monk named Thich Nhat Hanh for the Nobel Peace Prize? So these are certain things about King that are kind of glossed over or are left out of the assessment of his legacy.
Well, I particularly love this quote because, as you stated earlier, he thought outside the box. He did things outside of the churchy box.
Mm-hmm.
You know, now I do think in the beginning he was a little churchy, and there's nothing wrong with being churchy. You know, I'm a pastor's kid. I'm a PK, right? I'm a preacher's kid. But when he started talking, like you were saying earlier, that he started saying some revolutionary stuff like, hey, you have two forms of governance, socialism for the rich. So we're going to take care of the rich people. We're going to give the rich people all the tax breaks. We're going to make sure that everything on their political agenda is taken care of. We're going to look out for the rich. But then we're going to tell the poor folk, hey, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. You know, it's your fault that you're poor. That you have to do something, and there's a truth to that. But in other words, there was welfare for the rich, and there was a middle finger for the poor.
Yeah, and if you look at how this country is designed, it's exactly that. You know, welfare for the rich. It may go under other names, but we just call a spade a spade.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, one of the things that I'm going to do, and we're going to get a hit on YouTube for this. YouTube might take us down, but one of the things I find interesting when we talk about dreams and nightmares, Dr. King, that Dr. King lied to us. That's the question. Did he lie to us? Did his strategies get us where we needed to go? You know, did he give us a false sense of security? He said he did. You know, a lot of times people will tout the I Have a Dream speech, and that was 1963. But in 1967, he was like, I got it all wrong. I take it back. And some people, when I say that, don't believe me. So let's hear it from the proverbial horse's mouth.
My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
I must confess that that dream that I had that day has a...
Dr. King was cut the check before cut the check was cut the check.
Well, I think what he also saw. So let's take August 28th, 1963. Okay. Everybody was in this euphoria. You know, he gave the I Have a Dream speech, which was really a reparation speech if you listen to the entire speech. Okay. His evolution from that point forward, which included his criticism of the Vietnam War, resources that were going towards the Vietnam War instead of the war on poverty that President Johnson had promised that he would wage war on. And I think as he traveled, particularly throughout the North, he began to see that, like he talked about, that there were things that had to be addressed that couldn't be addressed from a moral perspective, that we had to, I think King started asking himself, okay, how do I deal with the basic human needs of the people, the food, the clothing, the shelter, the employment, just those four things right there. How do I deal with those basic needs to ensure that working class people can live lives of human dignity, you know, to where they can feel a sense of self-reliance and self-sufficiency.
True that. And I tell you, this is one of the things that we miss and that American society intentionally does not share. You know, it does not share this. You know, the fact that he said, you know, in 1967, I had it wrong in 1963. You know, we were superficial.
Right.
We need to be realists.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's what we get. We got people pushing us on the dream piece.
Yeah.
And, you know, as one of our people said earlier, Kick Rocks, in order to dream, one must be first sleep, Pastor. So, you know, it's interesting that that's what America sells us. And it's important that we do the research, we do the precise thinking ourselves so we can see what's really going on. Because there's a lot of trick bags. Actually, I really thought about calling this show tonight, Watch Out for the Trick Bag. Are you familiar with that house song, Watch Out for the Big Girl?
No.
All right. Well, we're going to remix it and be like, watch out for the trick bag. Watch out for the trick bag. That's what we're going to do right now. Watch out for the trick bag, because the trick bag is coming. The trick bag is coming. Kind of like the Soul Train line is coming, right?
Yes.
Let me share with you what I mean by the trick bag is coming, because there are a lot of our concerned Caucasian brothers and sisters who are using Dr. King and using a section of him and trying to use that for the trick bag. And they're saying crazy things. And let me give you an example.
Roughly 250 years. Just hold on to that number. 250 years we treated fellow human beings made in the image of God as if they were animals, and sometimes worse than we treat our own animals. The Constitution was written by wealthy men, intelligent men, supposedly God-fearing men, but 8 out of the first...
Constitution was not written by wealthy men. It was written by wealthy white men. That distinction is kind of important to the conversation. Press play.
First 12 presidents of the United States were slave owners. They were slave owners. Now, you can build all kind of little anonymies, how people treat their slaves like family and all that, but it is brutality and is evil any way you look at it. And now we see Dr. King came, along with Billy Graham and maybe internationally Winston Churchill. Dr. Martin Luther King was the most influential individual in the 20th century by far.
But Ed, tell your white congregants why.
That we're proud to be American. I'm proud to be American. But we can't overlook this disastrous history. At the same time, all important. The color of your face says all of those in the woke agenda. What does that mean? That if you were born black or some other color, that defines who you are, and you are, listen to me carefully, automatically a racist by being white.
Nice try. We ain't falling for the banana in the tailpipe. Press play.
Everything is tragically defined by racism. How different that is from Dr. Martin Luther King's understanding of the racial challenges we had in America then. And we progressed a great deal, but we still have some ways to go. But how far that we have come. You see, he would tell us, as we know, the color of your face doesn't determine your character and who you are. And really, you'll discover, doesn't say much about you and me. Did you know that all of our physical assets, ears, nose, mouth, body, make up 0.012 of who we are? Is that any big deal about you or about me? That color is all important of your skin? And Martin Luther King dreamed of a certain kind of America. I think we were getting there with not fast enough. 350 years of bigotry by leadership across the board is too much, folks. We can't deny that. We can't run from that. But we were getting there. And we're getting there because a lot of churches, Christians, that's how slavery got eliminated. In England, it was Wilberforce. And here it was Uncle Tom's Cabin. And here it was Henry Ward Beecher and others who stood against the evil and deadliness of racism. Oh, yes, it was through the church when people awakened to see that in the Bible we are one in Jesus Christ, period, Selah. When they began to preach that and see that, that's where racism was eliminated and still being healed.
Racism was eliminated
Well,
and still being healed. See, I'm telling you, it's the trick bag. The trick bag is coming.
Let's keep it a buck here, okay? Before Malcolm emerged, King was considered a militant, communistic so-and-so, okay? Once Malcolm and the Nation of Islam showed up on the scene, now white folks had a choice, okay? Do I deal with somebody who will slap me back like Sidney Poitier? Or do I deal with someone who will let me put my foot in their ass without any concern of retaliation or retribution? Okay? So there's certain things we have to keep in context. The only reason why white folks gravitated towards King, because we didn't want to deal with Malcolm. Okay? And then if we fast forward, when King realized the mistakes he made, that's when he opened the door for a young Trinidadian, then known as Stokely Carmichael, now Kwame Ture. Because King, even though he may not have agreed with the premise of Black Power, he knew that civil disobedience had already run its course, and a new generation was going to come with a different process.
Right. And that's when you started hearing him say things like, you know, society has done something special against us for hundreds of years and now must do something special for us. You know, that's when we start talking about reparations. I'm sorry. Let me clarify. That's when King started talking about acts that can repair the situation. Because, you know, back in the 1800s was the first movement for reparations. So King didn't start that. I'm not initiating or saying that. But that's when he started talking about there have to be some reparative actions for what happened to our people.
Right. And I think King, and that's why I was saying with King understood that the new generation wasn't going to stand for what they had to deal with. You know, the whole thing with Bull Connor and everything else. When he thought that the real goal was desegregation, it wasn't integration. Integration came when, you know, all these white liberals started pumping money in, and they basically got in front of what became the March on Washington, and you basically diluted the real message, which was reparations.
Okay. Right. Hey, the same thing just happened with, I'm not a fan of BLM. I'm not pushing BLM, but the same thing happened with the movement for Black Lives and the marches that happened in 2020, 2019, 2018, 2021, you know, with those uprisings and movements, we had people getting in front of the activities, pushing their own agendas. And once again, I'm not promoting or supporting BLM, but you saw that same thing happen where people got in front and pushed their own agendas, and it changed. So now it just changed the whole tenor of what was happening. And many of those people and many of those groups, as soon as they got what they wanted, disappeared.
And there's a parallel between what happened, you know, 1963 March on Washington, and what we saw happen in Ferguson with the assassination of Michael Brown. Both started at a grassroots level. It was the grassroots who were looking to initiate change from the ground up. And like you said, when other groups came in and basically hijacked the movement. And you'll hear young brother Darren Shields talk about what had happened with the hijacking of that movement, where it went from being about what I would call domestic terrorism, or what's commonly called police brutality, to something else. And then you look at all of what I call the blood money that was really made off the blood of Michael Brown, and then subsequently others who were murdered at the hands of law enforcement.
Yeah, and it's the banana in the tailpipe.
Right.
It's the banana in the tailpipe. And Dr. King, toward the end of his works, as we're saying, and this is what we're pushing tonight. We're pushing that Dr. King, toward the end of his work, started sharing and singing a new song. And that's the song that we need to continue. So I know that, the bootstraps piece is something that you really push into, brother. You want to dive deep into this?
Let's see.
It's all right to tell a man to lift himself by his own bootstraps. But it is a cruel jest to say a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps.
Right. And here's another thing that King did. King heightened the contradictions, because I think what King pointed out post March on Washington was the hypocrisy, because he understood that things were systemic. There's a clip where King is in a church where he breaks down about how farmers were given subsidies and other forms of funding to either not farm or to help them get started on different types of farming, you see. So when he talked about the whole thing about bootstrapping, and that goes back to the quote that you had earlier about socialism for the rich. Okay, so how do you tell a man who's barefoot to pull himself up by his bootstraps, but yet you bring all of these resources to other people to where they were able to get such a head start, and then we basically start with less than nothing?
And in many cases, we still are rebuilding from these acts of domestic terrorism that were sanctioned and supported by the United States government. Right. So we've been fighting back and rebounding from these acts of terrorism, as well as redlining and other acts that stripped us of land, that stripped us of wealth, that stripped us of legacy.
Right.
And so that's why we got to have this conversation tonight, and we need to spread this word that, hey, it's not just the dream. The dream was just like a snap in time. 1963, he shared his dream. 1967, he said, I got it all wrong. Here's the new mission. Hey, Todd Make says, I have a question. Can anyone pinpoint when the domestic push for reparations by folks like Callie House, Queen Mother Moore, MLK shift from Adolf-centric to all Afrocentric? I think he's asking his question is quite clear. So you're the historian, you're the researcher. When did groups like N'COBRA start really pushing their agenda that reparations should be for all of us rather than the descendants of those who were enslaved? Now, what I have on the screen right now is from 1897. Okay. This is the National Ex-Slave Mutual Relief, Bounty, and Pension Association of the United States of America. So in 1897, a group of ex-slaves organized by L.H. Dickerson in 1897 in Nashville, Tennessee, started this organization. And this is one of the first reparation movements. And they had their own pen. They had their own They had their own stuff. I mean, this is nothing new. Nothing
Right.
new. Nothing new. We're not saying you're nothing new. But in your studies, good brother, because I can't really tell you when that in Cobra ideology of that everybody gets it, everybody who looks like us, who might be connected to us, can get benefit. I'm not sure when that started. And that's kind of off topic for Martin Luther King. But, since the brother asked a question,
Yeah, from my at least from my research, I would have to start it with Queen Mother Moore. Okay, because when she was pushing the whole reparations movement, that was during the time of the Honorable Marcus Garvey, when he began launching the UNIA when he came to the States. Okay. And I think when you look at groups like in Cobra, I think what they did was they built on the legacy of Queen Mother Moore and expanded. Okay. So I would have to start with what Queen Mother Moore laid down first. And then move forward. I can't say exactly when in Cobra started. I'm not too familiar with its history. You hear the name, but I would have to start with Queen Mother Moore when she was doing it during the Garvey movement.
Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. Now I tell you what, the brother Todd says that it was in the same clip from the church we played earlier. Head Rights Grant. I'm gonna have to look that up because I just saw the name Callie.
Okay.
Callie House. So
Callie
let me look that up.
All right.
I wasn't familiar with that. So CALLIEHOUSE. Oh. Oh, yeah. So I was just showing that. Callie House was okay. All right. That's right. One of the things about the National Ex-Slave Mutual Relief Bounty and Pension Association was, even though our H.L. Dickerson started it, it was this queen who really pushed heavily for it.
Okay.
We got to push this. We got to push this. Yeah, so this is another conversation, but I really wanted to bring that up to kind of deal with Todd's question about, can anybody pinpoint when the domestic push for reparations moved from an ADOS-centric or FBA-centric to all Afrocentric? And that's something that we're going to have to look into. All right, so Don Teasy, are we going to address the incident in '64 when MLK was? Yeah. No. I would say no. Hey, look, MLK was a dude.
Okay, that's new to me.
That's new to you?
Yeah, that's new to me. I'm like, wow.
Look, I've heard some things of that nature, but to be honest, the way I looked at it, I had a hard time with it. That doesn't come out right when I finish the sentence. I was gonna say I had a hard time walking away from going with some of my bros to the strip club. So, the bachelor parties, I had a hard time walking away from those situations. So, I don't know if that's true or not. Don Teasy, I'm not saying that you're lying. Don Teasy is saying the message that happened, bro. But we're not going to address it because what we're focused on tonight is not that he may have been chasing some white chicks around in a hotel lobby. What we're dealing with tonight, Don Teasy, is how we can use the latter message of empowerment that he was focusing on to change the narrative about Dr. King and also to change our situation. I want to drop this into the ether.
Okay.
Prophet Noble Drew Ali in 1927 said, "We should keep firmly in mind the necessity of keeping each dollar spent as much as possible within the spheres of our own activities, where they will create further openings of business enterprises and wider opportunities for the men and women of our group to procure soundly remunerative employment. Forward must be the watchword of the seller and buyer alike. We make the money and we spend the cash. Let us sincerely cooperate one with the other. Our plight will change when we change ourselves.
Okay.
That's the kind of thing that Dr. King started talking about toward the end of his mission. Can you elaborate, good brother?
I don't know if people are familiar with this particular quote that King said. King said that the Negro had been conditioned to pay for what he wants and beg for what he needs. That's King. Okay. And what King began to understand is that if I'm going to help fight this war on poverty, it's going to require resources, and it's going to also require a shift in consciousness from being consumer to producer. Okay, that's why I said he started becoming more pragmatic and started dealing with the real everyday situations of, you know, working class people. And he also began to understand that when people begin to produce for themselves, it changes their mentality.
True that.
Okay. There's a confidence that you know, because now you feel that you're bringing value to a larger audience.
Now, is that to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps? Because, you know, that's what we get smacked in the face with.
But see, I'll put it to you this way. People who come with that, they really don't mean that. That's kind of a way of shaming us. Because if we really came up by our bootstraps, the one thing is this: you never want your consumer to become your competitor.
You know, I would agree. That's kind of like a White Lives Matter.
Check.
Check. Yeah, check. You know, it's just one of the things that it's like, shut up. Now, as Real as They Come says, our dollar doesn't stay in the community more than 6 hours. You know what? You know what? I got to do it. Check it out. Within the so-called Black community, money circulates. In other words, it stays in the community one day. In our Latino community, it stays in 1 week, 7 days. All right. And in the Asian community, 30 days. And, you know, Jewish community, a little more than that. And then the general white community stays in there for unmeasurable amount of time. So the HR Green Book is our... All right. So I wanted to highlight, you know, one of the activities that one of my groups is doing. We're putting together an online app and directory of our businesses, organizations, and professionals so that our money can circulate a little longer and a little stronger. That's our focus, to make sure our money circulates a little longer and a little stronger. So, you know, yeah. Don Teasy came back. I feel like the people in the audience in that church weren't listening to his understanding, his understanding, and his message. So do you think that some of the things that King said just went over folks' head?
Well, the thing that I've come to learn is this: sometimes you just have to plant the seed and keep moving. Okay. Because you plant the seed and it may take some time for it to germinate. Okay. So like if I were to take 5 watermelon seeds and I put them all in the same ground, give them the same water, give them the same sunshine, etc., each seed will grow at its own pace. Okay. So what King may have, you know, planted in the minds of the people, it may not manifest for, you know, who knows, maybe months, maybe years.
I would say that some of those things are manifesting, and everyone's using the word manifest now. Manifesting, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. But those things are coming to fruition, or they're blooming in this time. What's interesting? He says, Dr. King said, whenever the issue of compensatory treatment for us is raised, some of our friends recoil in horror. We should be granted equality, they agree, but we should ask for nothing more. And that's the interesting thing, because now with this talk of reparations for the descendants of those who were enslaved, went through Jim Crow and some of the other horrors, we have a lot of folks like, yeah, but as long as we stop, mistreating you, that should be enough. We had Barack Obama saying education is reparations.
No. See, what people are really afraid of is for African people. Dr. John Henry Clark had a line. It's funny, but it's no joke. He says, African people owe the world nothing but an ass kicking. Okay. And my whole thing is, I think divine retribution is what really scares people. That one day African people are basically going to go on a world ass kicking tour and take no prisoners in the process. So it's kind of like, it's coming. The question is when, and how do I make sure that I'm not that generation who has to face it?
Gotcha.
Okay.
Well, you know what, Todd, and I appreciate what you're doing tonight, Todd. Salute to Todd. Brings in the circulating dollar theory has been highly scrutinized and debunked by Dr. Jared Ball when it comes to spending power, buying power. Now, that's the great thing. When we talk about the circulation of a dollar, let me go back to what, the prophet Noble Drew Ali stated, right? He stated that when we keep the money within the sphere of our own activities, where they will create further openings of business enterprises and wider opportunities for the men and women of our group to procure soundly remunerative employment. The spending, the circulating of our dollars longer and stronger, we're not really focused on the spending power, Todd. That's not what we're really kind of focused on. We're focusing on the more sinister portion of Obama talking that mess. No, he's not ADOS. He's not FBA. But it wasn't spending power. There is no power in spending.
No. And see, this is what really chaps my ass when I hear folks want to criticize, but they've never studied any form of economic theory. Okay. Real wealth and real power comes through production, not consumption. Okay. And you have to excuse me. I was just listening to some of Dr. Amos Wilson before we came on tonight. Okay. So everything is about production. You can't consume your way into equality
or freedom.
It comes through production. So this whole thing about quote unquote purchasing power, how do you aggregate that to where it becomes real power? Like in my book, okay, I'm self-promoting, Gospel of Afronomics Theology. One of the things that I talk about is every Black economic liberation theology must be built on a nucleus of culture, history, and spirituality. And in one of my principles, which I got from our elder, Dr. George C. Fraser, we want African people to be the number one employer of African people. Now, what Dr. Fraser said is that that's going to be a 100-year process, because it's going to take the Black business community to be at the forefront to solve that high unemployment issue, which means that there has to be what I call an African-centered entrepreneurial revolution, particularly amongst the men.
All right, yeah. So as real as they come says, yeah, we need more entrepreneurs. You know what? Because we talked, I think, I want to say 2 weeks ago. maybe 3 weeks ago, during the Kwanzaa celebration, when we talked about the principle of Ujamaa, which says that we need to build our own stores, shops, and other businesses and profit from them together. It wasn't saying we should spend money with each other. That wasn't the focus of that. It was saying we need to build our businesses. We need to build our businesses because that's where true power comes from. And that's the same thing Dr. King was talking about. And the concept of, the money circulating was to make sure that our businesses were viable so we can employ each other. Now, here's an interesting thing about communities. Those communities that self-employ, they don't have crime to the same degree. They don't have teenage pregnancy to the same degree. They don't have, they may have some domestic violence to the same degree, but crime and teenage pregnancy and lower achievement in the educational system doesn't happen in communities where they self-employ. And so we got to work on self-employment. Why are we still talking about people like King that sold us out? Wow. So I think this is a troll. I don't know.
Okay.
The name Cotton Picker tells me this might be a troll. I'm going to leave that alone, man. I'm going to leave that. I'm like, huh? Yeah, I'm going to leave that alone.
Okay.
Yeah. It's some craziness out there. But check it. King said we must develop programs that will drive the nation to realization of the need for a guaranteed annual income. Okay. What are your thoughts on that, brother?
Now, here's something that's really going to throw people, okay? And I don't know if we've had this conversation yet about UBI, Universal Basic Income. In some of the research that I've done, they've said that King was actually an advocate of UBI, or what he calls guaranteed annual income. Now, guess who else was an advocate for UBI along with King that you would never expect? Your former president, Richard Nixon.
Not surprised at all.
Okay. And so, and I don't know exactly, when King started advocating for a UBI or a guaranteed annual income. And I would make a guess that he hadn't fully thought it out yet, but it was just something that was germinating in his mind. Okay, depending on when he put the quote out.
Okay. A Cotton Picker says that Cotton Picker is no troll, and RNSJ says that Dr. King worked for the CIA. That might be true. That might be true. But what we're not talking about right now are things that get us off course. Someone earlier said, are we going to address the fact that, Don Teasy, salute to Don Teasy. He makes some other great comments. But he started with, are we going to talk about Dr. King's nefarious situations with some of the women that the government tried to hook him up with? We're not dealing with that tonight. This is not a bash Dr. King night. This is, hey, this person was imperfect, but he left some good nuggets that we need to follow. That's what this is about.
Because I always say this. Yeah, that Tricky Dicky, that Richard Nixon. and in fact, the actual date is August 15th, 1971, when he took the US dollar off the gold standard. So that was the actual date.
Right. Now, that's not material to tonight's conversation.
Right. But when we start looking at, like what you were talking about with King, I always say when we look at folks in history, and this is what Dr. Wilson was saying, you have to treat everybody like a Chinese buffet. Take the best, leave the rest.
Right.
Okay?
Hey, we got to leave that inward stuff alone. So look, stay on course.
Right. So
stay on course.
So that's why I said, what was the best that King left us with that we can continue to build on? Okay.
Well, Dr. King said whites, it must frankly be said, are not putting in a mass effort to re-educate themselves out of racial ignorance. It is an aspect of their sense of superiority. Now, I would say
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I will let you say your point, but I would say we need to put in a mass effort to re-educate ourselves out of our empowerment ignorance. What would you say?
Here's, and I'm going to take a page from Dr. Wilson. Okay. What would it really benefit white folks? Because think about it. If you have a system of racism, white imperialism, okay, if you continue to benefit from it, what would you gain by helping to destroy it if you were still a direct or indirect beneficiary of it? Okay, so when you look at how African and European people approach this thing, European people are trying to preserve it. African people are trying to dismantle it and overthrow it. So you're coming from two different paradigms. And that's why it says I'm not really interested in trying to have allies who are trying to play both sides of the fence. Because I said, what would it really benefit white people to destroy the very system from which they continue to benefit?
That's intriguing. That's intriguing. Okay. All right. That's an intriguing point. Now, King called the U.S. government the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. Any thoughts on that, brother?
Where did he lie? I mean, where did he lie? I mean, I've always said that America ain't nothing but a New Jack Rome. Kennedy said that it's a Pax Americana. How did America become who she was? Gangsterism, terrorism, and guerrilla pimping.
Give the three again, brother. I love it. I love it.
Gangsterism, terrorism, and guerrilla pimping.
Hey, I want to kind of switch the conversation for a moment. We have some other great comments that have come in. Cotton Picker says, I'm not here to bash the elder, the ancestor rather, but today we as a people can do better. We need to reach the youth. Huh. So how can we reach the youth, man? You know what? That's a dumb question. Let me say this. Here's a question. How can we reach and teach the youth with the final messages from Dr. King? Because he was on code toward the end, right? We all agree that he was on code toward the end. How can we reach them? And I know you're going to hold up your book as another shameless plug. You're trying to sell your book.
Here's one thing that I think we have a nasty habit of doing, and this is what Dr. Amos Wilson says. We have a thing that what he calls super N-ism, okay, where we continue to expect perfection from imperfect people. You know, one of the things that Brother Steve Coakley always said is that all of us have a propensity for error. But at the same time, okay, are we looking for perfection or are we looking for excellence? What are we really looking for here? And so this is where we have to really begin using history as a tool in terms of here are the things that we did well. Here are our shortcomings. And I've always said this. For future generations, if you're going to make mistakes, make new ones. Don't repeat the same mistakes that your predecessors repeated. So we have to begin to use history as a learning tool and not using it for ethnic cheerleading.
Ethnic cheerleading. All right. You know what? Cotton Picker, I called Cotton Picker a troll earlier. I'm taking that back. Because Cotton Picker is dropping some interesting comments into the archives. I appreciate you, Cotton Picker. So no one is perfect, but he had to know what he was doing. So let's take it back. Cotton Picker said, well, original Skywalker, who do we trust so many who do we trust when so many that look like us have betrayed us? So I guess the question that is coming up is, if we're not bashing King for the way that King did some of his things in the beginning, and if we're saying that at the end the damage had already been done, and if we're saying that we're looking for perfection with imperfect people, how do we get around this? These are some really new concepts, because before I would dare say, when I came up, we didn't disrespect or even question elders. And it was the conscious raising movement that really got me, in the 1980s, when I was like, yo, some of this stuff is whack. Some of this stuff was off code, but now, how do we create the critical thinkers? Because, Dr. King changed over time. The Dr. King that was killed was not the Dr. King that started.
And I think also we, as African people, for whatever reason, we don't allow people to grow and evolve. Okay. That's the problem that I have is, and we always want to look at people in a vacuum and not within the context of which they've had to operate. Okay.
That's intriguing. Okay. Because when we look at Dr. King, like Cotton Picker and many of our conscious people are doing, because I went through my phase, like what Cotton Picker. What Cotton Picker is saying are things that I said 15, 20 years ago when I was like, Dr. King was whack.
Okay. but see, here's the thing though. We don't want, and this is a term that I've coined, okay? We don't want to become Hotep hecklers. Okay. And what I mean by that is, critical thinking doesn't mean that you sit there and you nitpick. Okay. The overall question is, okay, what can we take in terms of taking the best of and running with that and making sure that we don't repeat the mistakes that the predecessors created. Okay.
You know what? That kind of brings me to, like, with my father.
Okay.
Love my father, right? Was a great man, did a lot of great things for a lot of people. But there was some times when I was like, Pops is off code. And I couldn't expect my father to be everything. And what's interesting is when I look back upon my pops, and my mother as well. But when I look back on my father, there were times when he realized that he couldn't give me what I was searching for. So he introduced me to people. He realized this cat is a little more, this guy is a little more militant than I am in my life right now. So, he bought me Farrakhan records. You can tell I'm old school. I actually got the Honorable Minister Farrakhan records. His recordings were on records that you would, I was DJing with back in the day.
Oh wow, yeah.
So he took me to see Farrakhan and some other stuff, but I'm saying he introduced me. He bought me the autobiography of Malcolm X and the compendatory of Malcolm X, where I was listening to all the tapes and reading all the speeches.
Right.
So he was like, I know that I'm not as militant as my son and revolutionary as my son needs for his development right now. So I got to take him to somebody else. I'm not a good chess player, so I had to take my son to a chess master. I can fight, but there's some people who can fight better. So I put my son in boxing and in martial arts so he could be better than I could, so he can protect me as I'm getting older.
Right.
So I can't expect my father to be everything. There was a time in my life when I did.
Mm.
And I scolded him, and I was calling him, different things because he wasn't everything.
Mm.
And now I realize he couldn't be everything. And I think in many cases, that's what we've done with some of our so-called leaders.
Right. But see, your father, and this is where we have to give your father credit. He understood his shortcomings enough to where he says, okay, I'm short here, but let me find an expert here. So he was humble enough to know what his limitations were and to be able to seek, I guess you will call them what I call GMTs or Grandmaster Teachers. Okay. That he pointed you to in other areas of life. Okay. And I think those elders who are transparent with their shortcomings, I think we can appreciate them more than those who try to present this facade of perfectionism. And then when they fall off that pedestal, many of us don't really know how to act. I mean, even Malcolm says, and I forgot who he told this to, but he says, look, if I am not in accordance with this book, meaning the Quran, you pull my coattail. Okay. How many leaders do you know that would openly make that declaration to his followers?
Well, you know what? I want to bring that into today. I would say that all of us have the propensity to get off code.
Check.
And we need in our lives accountability partners and accountability coaches and consultants to stay on top of our game. Look, people say that Michael Jordan was one of the best who ever did it. Michael Jordan always had a coach.
Check.
Right. So we all need our coaches and our advisors to stay on top of our game. One of my coaches is Dr. Venus Opal, and she dropped an interesting blog the other day that I wanted to kind of go through because I think it's kind of interesting.
Okay.
All right. It says, I wish Dr. King hadn't dreamed. Hear me out, please. A dream is fragile. It can be manipulated, subjugated, eradicated. A dream is vulnerable. It can be misappropriated, commercialized, weaponized. A dream is intangible. It can be manipulated, victimized, criminalized. A dream is a vision, something to strive for, but impossible to obtain. The striving requires endless effort, back-breaking work, soul-crashing sacrifice. For what? A dream? I can hear so clearly the hopes of the ancestors who marched, who sat, water hoses, police dogs, jail, all for a dream. Feed people hope when they have no power. Hope for something makes us brave. Dreams fuel the passion to march into the next generation so they can run. Vision is seeing what's not there as if it were. We sometimes call that faith, the substance of things hoped for that are unseen. Dr. King's dream was a vision, a prophecy of what equality could look like. For the audacity of that dream, he was beaten, arrested, and murdered. I wish Dr. King hadn't dreamed, or at the very least not shared his dream with the world. If he hadn't, maybe his 4 little babies would not have been left fatherless. Perhaps he would have been alive to facilitate unity of labor unions on both sides of the color line, groomed a group of our leaders to teach the babies how to organize politically to impact legislation, not just visualization with marches. Taught us the value of spending power as well as the power of our unity. I wonder if Dr. King had kept his dream to himself, would we even have the prison industrial complex? Or teen moms, melanated men who publicly hate melanated women, the crack epidemic. I wonder if Dr. King had lived just 10 years longer, I believe his dream would have been translated into strategic actions that would have altered the course of human history. We would be living in an entirely different world if Dr. King had lived to make his dream a reality. I don't begrudge the dream. It has inspired the world in justice and continues to do so. I thank Dr. King for his dream and sacrifice such that I could speak, learn, live, and buy in the ways that Dr. King could not during his lifetime. I honor Dr. King's dream, his service, his sacrifice. I just wish he had lived long enough to fulfill it. And that's from Dr. Venus Opal. Dr. Venus is one of my mentors. It's interesting that you put that way. I've really never thought about King and his legacy of the dream in that manner. What if he would have lived?
See, here's my problem with all of that, okay? Go back to King's last speech. There's a phrase in there where he says, I just want to do God's will. Not his, but God's will. So what King says, look, I'm not a leader. I'm just a servant of the people. Okay? But what God showed me was, regardless of the process, at the end, we will all get to sit in the VIP section of the club. Just save me a seat. Okay. And I think we forget that all of these heroes that we have are servants of the people, that they gave their lives for something greater than themselves. And so when we sit here, it's almost like we're still looking for somebody with an S on his chest or somebody else to do the dirty work. Okay. And
interesting.
And so for me, it's like, okay, Malcolm's been gone for nearly 60 years. But there's a blueprint that he left us that we need to carry forward.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
King was beginning, even in that last speech, there was somewhat of a blueprint in there. Our job is not to ask for another King or ask for another Malcolm, because do we even deserve another Martin or a Malcolm when we didn't even protect the ones that was given to us by the university ancestors in the first place? Okay? So let's stop begging the universe for messiahs and do messiah work. If that makes, any sense here.
That makes a lot of sense. Cotton Pickett says it's crazy. The government kills them, then makes us celebrate them. Are we even thinking for ourselves? And not just are we thinking for ourselves, are we doing for self? That was the legacy and the lessons was do for self.
And here's another thing. I always ask the question, which is greater, the icon or the ideology? Icons come and go, but the ideology is what remains. And it's the ideology that we have to embrace, not hoping for another icon, but taking the ideology and building on the ideology. That's what we need to do. If we want to really honor Dr. King during this time, then what was his ideology? And how do we take the best of his ideology and apply it to modern times? Just like anyone else. So, and especially at this stage of my life, I'm not in the business of being a Hotep heckler. I'm really in the business of, what did he leave? What was the best of what he left? And how do we make it applicable to what we're doing today?
True that.
Okay. That's really what it should be about.
I want to kind of bring this to an end. We, going an hour and 10 minutes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it time flies when Zumbi's talking. Hey, I'm leaving some quotes by Dr. King up, one of his speeches on the screen. But what I really want to do is go over your solutions, brother. So Be a $20 revolutionary. What's that about?
Being a $20 revolutionary says every week, make a $20 purchase from a Black-owned business establishment, be it brick and mortar or e-commerce. And what that does is now we get people into the habit of supporting our own establishments. Okay.
Got you.
Yeah.
And what's the science of beef?
Beef. Beef stands for business, economics, entrepreneurship, and finance. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad said that there were 3 sciences people needed to master in order to have any sense of civilization. This is the first science that he mentions, is what I call the science of beef.
Okay. Be a cop.
Particularly for those who create content or create information, be a creator, be an owner, and then being a protector of all of your intellectual property that you develop.
Be a cultural tither.
Being a cultural tither means this: a dime out of every dollar should go to a race first or African centered institution that looks out for the well-being of the African world community. And whether you think it's a Nation of Islam, UNIA, Moorish Science Temple, give a dime of every dollar to an African-centered or race-first organization.
I'll say that. And, I also want to, I really kind of get down with some of the political movements. One of the movements I'm saying now is we should demand something for our political resources, our votes. The Prophet Noble Drew Ali told us we have to stay involved in the affairs of men. We have to be involved in the affairs of men. I also want to reiterate that, we got to stay on code when it comes down to the way that we use our resources. Our plight will change when we change ourselves. Today we've been talking about Dr. King. But in talking about Dr. King, we've been talking about our empowerment.
Right.
All I want to do is continue to empower the community through group economics. This is the fight of our time. The fight of my parents and my grandparents were, sitting at the diner, making sure that the laws aren't blatantly against you in a very explicit way. The fight of our generation is economic empowerment. This is something that Malcolm X was strong on, especially near the end. This is something that Martin Luther King spoke about a lot, especially near the end of his life. Economic empowerment is our civil rights issue.
That's our issue. That's our issue. So let's wrap it up. I want to say peace to the family. I want to say drink your water. I want to say stay on code. Show me your book, good brother.
Oh, yes. Gospel of Afronomics Theology. You can pick it up at any melanated bookstore or Amazon. I'm working on the expanded edition of this, which hopefully will be out, if not this year, but early next year, 2024.
I say that. I want to let people know that one of the things that I do is I help people who are real estate investors. So here's an example of one of the properties that I helped an investor flip. And, we can help you get the money to purchase the property. We can help you get the money to rehab the property. And then you can purchase property and flip it. So if you're interested in doing that, hit me up. Would love to work with you. Would love to work with you. So let me take to our last comment. MLK said we're going to get our check, and that scared the government. Yep. Hit the like button. Hit the like button and share this link. All right, y'all. Be at peace.